this week. Yeah, and next week just kind of an advertise. So next week we'll have Vincent, and she'll talking about quantum computing. And actually, he's kind of his summer, I guess. He went for IBM to do the intern, so he kind of have a real, just firsthand news about just what's quantum computing is going on, and he's kind of sharing this to us. So it should be very interesting. And just it's the only condensed matter experiment talk. So yeah, that's it. So like I say, I try to in the summer, I kind of try to diversify all the research areas, just every research area, just one person, and also including some of this, either this Charlotte will tell us about this mental health talk, or later Charlotte and Sabrina will tell us about this women in physics, or more general, this minorities in physics, like that, and also these kind of topics. So yeah, hopefully this can be a change. So, all right, so let me kind of a brief introduction to Charlotte. I try my best, but okay, sorry about it. Okay, so Charlotte, she joined our department in 2017, if that's correct. And so she focused on astrophysics, but she's not only just doing astrophysics, she's also interested in making music, and she's actually a musician, Is that correct? That's correct, right?
That's true. Yeah.
So hopefully we can hear your performance later in the future, Yeah. And so, as far as I know, she's one of the most active person who cares about students' benefits, or just any inequality things that in our department. So like when I started this SBAR, and I kind of emailed to some faculties in our department, and then I just asked, okay, can you just recommend some people in our departments? And yeah, Charlotte just pop out in the email, And Sabrina, yeah, sure. That's just without saying anything, that's the thing, right? So yeah, so without further ado, let's give Charlotte a big hand before that, so we can unmute ourselves and kind of a virtual app before Charlotte start.
Yay.
Thank you so much for attending.
Thank you. Thank you for that really, really nice. So I have like the squeakiest chair in the world, so it's probably going to get picked up on the mic, but thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I want to, try and walk back the expectations a little bit, and just let let everyone know here that there's a completely selfish reason for me doing this talk. In this talk, actually, or in one form or another, has been around since before I joined the graduate student body at Rutgers here. But I have been lucky enough to be a part of it for the last, I think this is going to be the third time that I've been involved in presenting the mental health talk. And I say that I do this selfishly, and that's because I utilize some, if not all, of these resources. And so that's kind of my qualifications for this, which I'm not really qualified. But grad school is really challenging. That is even before we're dealing with a global pandemic, which is incredibly stressful. And so that's why we need to know about these resources. So I'm going to start sharing my screen here. If I can find my cursor, there we go. And get started with just kind of going through some slides. And that, here we go. And so I just want to give you an idea of what the structure of this is going to be like. In the past, it's been a little bit more interactive. There is an opportunity for us to kind of, I'm going to prompt you at various times to think about certain things while we're going through this. But then I'm hoping that at the end, we can, maybe if it's possible, stop recording and have like, just an informal discussion about some of the different things that maybe spoke to us or maybe didn't, if people are comfortable talking about that. So I'm focusing on a lot of preventative stuff to start with, and then I will also address some of the resources that are available to us as Rutgers students and as humans. So basically just kind of gonna do a little bit of motivation, also going to cover symptoms and triggers. These are not meant to be real diagnostics. These are meant to be, please don't diagnose yourself with this, but it's meant to be like, kind of like so that you can recognize things. And then we'll talk about the resources as I alluded to earlier. And then, we can kind of talk about what we can do for ourselves, for one another, and how we can, especially in times of COVID, be able to, kind of really deal with things. Okay. So why am I giving this talk? I think I kind of already led on. I do struggle with mental illness. That is, manageable outside of grad school and requires a lot more active management within grad school. It doesn't make me an expert because my circumstances are going to be different from other people's circumstances. And this doesn't have, you don't have to have a diagnosed, problem to benefit from any of these tools. We can all feel anxiety, we can all feel depression, we can all feel, just feeling overwhelmed and unable to cope. And that's when you're going to be in need of whatever resources or tools work for you. Okay, so we should try and figure out what those are. Yay! Okay, and means. Okay, so there's no way that I can make this comprehensive and complete. This is more kind of like a workshop of like what techniques have been used to manage the symptoms of stress, anxiety, and depression. Also being able to identify that for yourself and be able to seek out resources when you need to. Just some kind of maintenance for yourself and potentially new things that you could try. And an opportunity to have a conversation about why grad school can sometimes be the worst, even if it's the best. Okay. I think I've said it before, please don't diagnose yourself using this. If you see something that's here that, is like a little bit worrying to you, like if you're like, oh, like, I feel like I am too stressed out, maybe this is a wake-up call for me. We have resources that we will cover here where you can actually go and you can talk to somebody about that. And that's great. I've done it. And also, this is not meant to call you out and say that you're doing anything wrong because you're feeling stressed or because things are overwhelming or because teaching online is very difficult. You're doing a really great job, and the fact that you showed up here today means that you're doing an exceptional job. And this is also not meant to endorse anything, any kind of technique or anything, right? Or any of the resources that I'm presenting. These are just options, okay? All right, so let's talk about some depressing statistics. There's been a number of studies about stress, anxiety, depression amongst graduate students. These are not physics grad students. This is just graduate students in general. I see in the chat. Oh yeah.
Sorry about it.
Great. Okay, I was just double checking. Yeah, actually, if you could, if you drop anything in the chat, also feel free to interrupt me at any time too, because I tend to talk a bit when I'm nervous, so I'll just keep talking. So grad students actually have a really ridiculously high level of depression and anxiety if you compare them with, you know, a random sampling of the general population. And it turns out that it's about 6 times more. That is not specific to STEM, it's not specific to physics, it is just grad students in general. 1 in 2 PhD students has, you know, some sort of psychological distress, and 1 in 3 is at risk of having a common psychiatric disorder. I don't know what a common psychiatric disorder means, but a lot of these are centering around anxiety and depression. Okay. So there are a number of other formal and informal studies that that say that grad students, that nearly half have symptoms that are similar to depression. And one of the large causes in this is difficulty of taking care of needs outside of work, because they feel as though they literally can't. So that's the depressing stuff. And, you know, it does highlight, you know, the issues that we're really talking about here, and how do we kind of balance some of the pressure that's put on us. And I have an informal anecdote too that I think is also quite motivating. That I remember my first year here, I went to a talk about managing stress and anxiety. It was a workshop that was offered on Bush campus back when anything was on Bush campus that wasn't just geese, basically. And in the room, there were about 10 people, and the majority of them were actually people I recognized from the physics department. So I'm not saying that we should extrapolate any conclusions from that, but we all know that it can be a very taxing and demanding area of study at times. So you're not alone. Okay, oops, there we go. No, there we go.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Previous slide. So, oh.
Here we go.
Great. So like you say, the first it's not just about STEM people. So what do you think that, like, okay, so for STEM people, it'll be more like bigger than 6 times, or just a guess? I don't know. Or what
You
do
know,
think?
I can't speculate on it. I know my experience, but I also know that you know, one of the kind of trademarks of grad school is that oftentimes we feel as though we're completely alone, that our struggle is like, you know, only our struggle. And so it makes it really difficult to be able to figure out whether or not this is something that is systemic and a problem within, you know, your own head, your department, physics, or grad school in general, right? Without talking to other people. So all I know is that, you know, the only reason why I bring up that it's not physics specific, but that, you know, this is a problem within physics as well, from is because I want to make sure that everyone knows that, like, you know, this is a normal issue for us to be having, right? This is a normal thing for us to kind of try and strike that balance and find, like, you know, and try and find, like, you know, a way of dealing with it, right? Does that answer?
Yeah, thanks. Oh. Great.
I wish they would do a study just on, you know, this in physics, because I'd like to see if it's different. Okay, I'm going to kind of keep going through a little bit of the statistics, and then we can move on to something a little bit less droll and depressing. So the symptoms here are feeling under constant strain, feeling unhappy and depressed, losing sleep over worry, low self-confidence, worthlessness, and inability to make decisions, right? These are really common. This sounds like you're just kind of describing a grad student in general sometimes, especially when they're worrying about an upcoming deadline or something like that. But these are symptoms of depression. And so a lot of, at least, a lot of 51% or 51 out of this, they were reporting at least 2 symptoms, and a good chunk were reporting 4. So anyway, it's a real problem. Okay, so this is also a little bit stressful, but I'm going to go over a couple of common symptoms of depression and anxiety, so that those are things hopefully that you can recognize if you feel as though you are, kind of getting triggered by things happening around you. Whether it just feels like there are too many things piling on. So these symptoms can pop up regardless of whether you have an underlying mental health problem. You can have never experienced depression before in your life or anxiety, and this can be something that can kind of show up as a natural response to having a bunch of stress in your life, like graduate school can provide at times. But if you have had issues like this before in the past, these can also, the things that happen in grad school can totally exacerbate that. Okay, so what you should be looking for is feeling overwhelmed, procrastination, disordered sleep, which could mean either you can't get out of bed and you're sleeping constantly, or you cannot fall asleep because you're thinking about your, analysis, or, what people are going to think about it. Disordered eating, which once again, it's just something on the extremes. We're looking at kind of like the, the end of the distribution. Indecision, feeling distracted, low self-esteem, chronic fatigue, physical pain. So this is one that people don't necessarily know about, but having headaches or pain in your body with some of these other symptoms can be an indicator. Same with stomach pain and stomach problems. Feeling completely empty and not finding pleasure in things that you used to enjoy. Okay, so that's a cheerful list. And this is also not a complete list, but here's a list. There's a list. Let's talk about anxiety. Okay, so anxiety, some of the things that you may notice when feeling anxiety is being restless, breathing too quickly, tremors and shaking, inability to sleep, stomach problems, once again, feeling numb or tingly in your limbs, catastrophic feelings, so something really bad is about to happen right now to me, that feeling, procrastination, once again, or avoidance, inability to relax, and feeling incredibly nervous about any kind of uncertainty, and also choking feelings. So I want to point to, there's a really nice graphic here that this actually gives you some physical things that you can do to, kind of push back if you're able to tune in and figure out that you're getting some of these symptoms early on, okay? And this doesn't necessarily work for everyone, but focusing in on the body during an anxiety attack and trying to, you know, kind of like physically relax a little bit can actually calm your nerves and start to reset you a little bit, which is really good. Okay. So, big nasty list of symptoms. Once again, it's not a diagnostic tool, but I do want to point out that some of the things, you know, being distracted, like, you know, having problems with sleep and like, you know, not being able to focus on anything. These are things that a lot of the time, sometimes when we're doing these, we find ourselves doing these, we tend to immediately kind of heap on a little bit of extra self-loathing. It may or may not be related to anxiety or depression, but regardless, if you are, you know, finding yourself procrastinating or doing something along those lines it could also be a result of stress, and it might be a good time for you to gently take a break so that you can reset, okay? And also just don't blame yourself. It's not fun. It's also, it rarely has good results. Okay, so you've probably felt some of these things. And if you didn't feel these like within grad school, you may have felt these when you were going through a particularly stressful or possibly traumatic time in your life. And now we all have extra stressful and traumatic times in our life because we are living in a time that basically every single email that is addressed to us starts off with "in these unprecedented times." So, you know, we're all together trying to get through this, right? This is totally normal and totally natural. So I have a couple of prompts here. You may have already seen these. I'm going to leave a little bit of radio silence after reading them out loud. I don't expect anyone to answer them right now, but I would like you to mull them over. Okay, so first question is, do you remember a time when you were under extreme stress? And also, how does your body respond when you are feeling stressed? Do you know? Do you have any clues on that? And the last thing to consider, and this is just for you personally, do you find that it's easy for you to, you know, be self-aware when you are actually becoming stressed? Okay, so there's a reason why I ask all of these things, and it's, you know, we've all felt some sort of stress, but you know, feeling it coming on can really, like, it can be a big help for you to be able to be like, oh, I know what that is. And then be able to utilize some of the tools in your toolbox, which you may have already. Okay, so I'm going to go through some prevention techniques mostly. There are also resources. This is going to be like drinking from the water hose, and some of these are going to sound some of these might sound downright stupid to you. That's okay. Some of them may be useful. Hopefully, at least some of them may be useful. You don't have to do all of the things if you're feeling stressed. This is just, you know, trying to kind of give you some ideas of what you could potentially do. in order to handle stress and anxiety before it gets, you know, serious, right? Small things that you can put in place. And so you probably already have some of these. So I'm going to ask one more question before we go into this. Based on your the last three questions and what you were thinking about, can you think of what coping mechanisms you actually do have that you deal in order to deal with stresses that come up in your daily life? Okay. I bet you thought of something. Or maybe you were like, nope, nothing whatsoever. Or maybe, and this would be really awesome, maybe you're like, I don't get stressed. And we all like, oh, you're lucky. Good for you. That's great. Okay. All right.
Can I ask a question before you go in here?
Of course, yes.
So there are three terms. One is stress, one is anxiety, and one is depression. So I'm kind of it's really difficult for me to kind of differentiate these three. So what do you think? I mean, kind of an easy way to.
I would say, so stress is kind of a precursor to either of them. Stress is just a normal thing that, you know, you're backing out of a parking lot anywhere in New Jersey because New Jersey drivers are crazy. Like, you're going to experience a small amount of stress. Does that mean that you are in danger of, you know, suffering like, you know, a nervous breakdown? Probably not. The drivers in New Jersey are pretty crazy. But that's stress, right? And so small amounts of stress that we may have, like stress is a good thing. Stress is motivating. Stress can be like, you know, it can be a thing that you are excited about, like is like, you know, that's that same feeling, right? Where you're like, I have this opportunity. Like it can be like, you know, I'm nervous about it, but it's good. It's still, that's a stress. So there's positive stress, there's negative stress, but when there's a lot of stress, sometimes that can upset your internal like brain chemistry a little bit. You know, a lot of stress can dump a ton of cortisol into your brain constantly. And since we're kind of designed to, you know, go be chasing, you know, deer around on a plane somewhere, you know, our brain still does this thing when we are dealing with like, you know, paying a parking ticket. Plus we have like, you know, had like an argument with our significant other, and plus we're, you know, having to like get our quantum homework in. And plus we're like worried about like, you know, paying the rent, and, you know, plus it's a global pandemic. A lot of those things can keep giving that signal to your brain where it's just kind of saying there's a lion that is right behind you, because you're, you know, those separate things are telling your brain, respond to the immediate issue at hand. And when you do that too much, it just, your brain falls out of homeostasis. And that's where you can end up with, you know, like some sort of imbalance, like having anxiety, which is much, you know, that is a much more intense feeling. It's a trauma response, where your entire body basically will start telling you that immediately right now, you are about to get eaten by a tiger, whether you are or not. And that can be anxiety. Depression, on the other hand, is kind of where you stop producing the serotonin as a response to this imbalance of the other chemicals in your brain from this. And when you stop producing that serotonin, then you stop being able to essentially function on you know, on a lot of levels, and it can really, really inhibit and suppress your ability to get anything done. That was a long explanation. Does it?
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Great.
Awesome. Okay. So I gave a little bit of a, serotonin, cortisol, all of these things. I mean, all of the stuff that we're going to talk about with like mental hygiene, what it's meant to do, like, is it's meant to give you that extra kick of endorphins and serotonin to keep you balanced basically when you're feeling stressed. So these are preventative measures, and it's just trying to get you a normal baseline of good mental health so that your brain is able to respond better when, I don't know, like an important homework assignment gets deleted like the day before it needs to be sent out to your students, or your Zoom gets like Zoom bombed, or you have to take a qualifier. And in that way, hopefully you already have these tools. And so a lot of the things that people generally look to is good nutrition, don't just eat candy all day. Sleeping, which is really, I have to stress, but like I know it's really hard to do because we tend to, when there are due dates and when there are, deadlines, like we tend to push it to the last minute because we have no other choice because we are always busy 100% of the time, right? But you have to sleep. Exercise, which, is not something that all of us necessarily spent a lot of time doing in undergrad because we were studying physics, but it is incredibly useful and it can completely reset you when you're stuck on a problem. And it gives you a good boost of those good chemicals. So mindfulness, this can be a bunch of things. It can be, yoga, breathing exercises. It can also be, there are forms of exercise, other forms of exercise that can put you in a mindful state. But it's referring to mostly meditation. And so being able to focus on being in the present moment. And the last thing is, if you do use pharmaceuticals to help you gain that baseline of good mental health in the first place, you have to keep taking your meds. You can't go off them without a doctor in the middle of grad school. It's not a good idea. Okay. All right. So let's talk about a couple of different things. This is interesting. So in here, we're talking about vitamin D and caffeine. Vitamin D is actually pretty well studied, and there's a fairly decent correlation with depression. There's an anti-correlation with vitamin D levels and depression. Which is really neat because vitamin D is something that you can just buy on a shelf, and it's something that you get from the sun. But everyone is like, oh, don't just take vitamin D, you can get it from the sun. Well, we don't generally get enough vitamin D from the sun. Our bodies really can't metabolize it that efficiently. One of the first things that I did when I went to see a doctor at CAPS, which we will talk about later, is that doctor was like, we're going to do a complete blood work workup, which is very responsible. And they checked to see if my vitamin D levels were deficient. And then they had me take a supplement. So it is real. Vitamin B is also, various vitamin Bs are also known to boost moods. And this is tricky because vitamins in and of themselves are not regulated by the FDA. And so, those claims are not necessarily something you want to take to heart, but there are actual studies on these ones. Caffeine, this one breaks my heart. And I hate reporting this to people because I am a coffee drinker and I will not give up my coffee. It is really good for a lot of things, but it also gives people anxiety. The rate of anxiety is higher, and depression is higher also with coffee drinkers. So I don't want to blame the coffee, but it's something that you should all consider as far as something to be careful of. Okay, my poor coffee. Okay. All right, so things that you can do. We talked a little bit about this, making your own endorphins. Exercise, well studied, and it actually benefits depression. It helps to treat depression in ways that are sometimes comparable to antidepressants. Stress reduction from yoga or meditation can be linked to endorphin release. And there are actual studies that show reductions in stress markers. And laughter actually is the best medicine, apparently, because social laughter, such as, going to S-Bar and like turning your mic off and just laughing at Charlotte for a while, is a way to release endorphins in the brain, right? So, okay. These are all really useful things. And so these are things that you can potentially use, throw them in your stress toolbox, try them. If you hate it, then, that's fine. You don't have to do it. Okay. So other things that you can do just to kind of keep yourself healthy is social interaction, the right amount of social interaction, not like I am exhausted because I have had too many Zoom calls today, but like I have connected with other humans, which is really, really challenging and probably like a full-time job to make this happen in the kind of mode that we're living in right now. Another thing that I am a huge advocate of is taking large things, large overwhelming tasks, and breaking it into smaller tasks that you can then tackle. And that sounds really basic, but it's actually incredibly, it's one of the easiest things to implement. So there are different productivity techniques. We'll talk about those. So also really selfishly scheduling, if you have to, put it on your calendar. Schedule some selfish time for yourself. Put together and think about like what you like to do when you're not working on physics, right? Because you have to have something else. You have to have something else. You have to have something else that's attached to you, so you're not just like putting all of your self-esteem in the physics basket, because it's not always going to be great, and you are great, and so it's usually going to be pretty awesome. But when things aren't going your way, you have to have something else. So make a list of those things and do it early. Like, even if it's like, what, one of the things that I really like to do is like taking my shoes off and putting them on my ears. Makes me feel good. Like, that's fine. Then you have that, okay? Then you have that for when like, you accidentally like, I don't know, reply all to, I'm not even sure, anything. And you can be like, okay, shoes are going on the ears right now. We're dealing with this, okay? All right. So I'm going to give a little bit of radio silence here for you to think about a couple of things that you could put on a list of like distractions, of like things that like you would want to do that are not physics when you're feeling generally kind of just stressed or overwhelmed, okay? So I just want to point out that this graphic that I stole from Danny DePiro is hanging over my Sarin desk. Hopefully it's useful to someone. Maybe the cleaning lady, I don't know. Okay. All right. So I talked about lists and things like that, where I'm like, take your thing and break it into like 8 little things, right? Like, it sounds dumb, but it totally works. I'm a huge advocate of to-do lists and also done lists. Keep a list at the end of the day of things that you did, because otherwise, like, you know, there's always going to be more things to do. There's always, you know, there's always going to be another paper to write. There's always going to be another project to start. There's always going to be something. So like, have a done list, even if the done list says I ate lunch and, you know, broke my code. Like, that's fine. Like, you can show yourself that you were working on something during the day. Okay. So there are different things that are useful to different people. There's bullet journaling, which is fun because you get to keep a whole bunch of different pens. Not really super familiar with that one, but it looks awesome and there's a lot of resources online for it. Panda Planner, which is similarly, it's a productivity hack with like, you know, no dates filled in, and you can kind of like, there's an image on the screen right now that kind of shows you the different things that it can do. And it does make you review at the end of your day. So that way you can really sense the tangible progress that you are making, even when it doesn't feel like you are. So you need to celebrate the achievements that you've made. I think that you deserve to. Even if you don't want to, you know, gratitude lists or just done lists or anything like that, celebrating small wins is like really important here, because those are the wins that we get on a regular basis, are the small ones. Okay. We're past the point of like, you know, turning in a homework assignment, getting a gold star and like graduating and going on. We're now like researchers, and that can be gritty and nasty and unfun because there's not like really defined ends to what we're doing, right? Okay. Other thing that you should potentially try doing is taking frequent breaks. It apparently makes people a lot more productive if they take frequent breaks. There's this thing called the Pomodoro technique. You work for 25 minutes on, and then you take a 5-minute break. And you do that for about 3 times, and then you take a longer break. It is really annoying because sometimes when you are in like the absolute flow and you are just like, you getting a lot of work done, your timer will go off and be like, time for a 5-minute break. But it does make you more productive. So I think it's at least worth trying. Okay. So other things that you can do too is try putting some fun stuff on your phone. There are lots of good free mental health apps. Some of them are like just incredibly soothing. Some of them are really involved. Here's a small number of them, and this isn't even like half of them. This isn't even in like half the popular ones. So Pacifica, it allows you to journal, it tracks your mood, it does all kinds of stuff. Mood Path is essentially the same thing, but it just prompts you with little questions, and then it tracks your mood, this is kind of nice because then you can kind of see, like, if you're into collecting data on your own mood, you can see how things go over the course of like several weeks. Calm Harm is actually a really neat app. It's designed to prevent people who self-harm from self-harming. Okay, so like cutting or hurting yourself or something like that, which is something that sometimes people feel they need to do. I find that it's useful on multiple levels because if you are experiencing anxiety or like a really heightened emotional state, or like basically anything where you just can't deal, it has amazing little distractions that'll get you out of your head and focused on the phone for about 5 minutes. Awesome. Allows you to reset. Insight Timer is just a meditation. It's like a free meditation service. So it's got also like some really boring study beats if you're into that. If you find yourself singing along to your own music, sometimes it's nice to just put on some meditation tunes. Habitica is really adorable. It gives you a little like 8-bit character that's like a little like got a little sword and a shield and stuff, and you just like level up and rack up experience points by doing basic daily tasks. And you get to define what those tasks are, right? Whether it's like, I read all of the new papers that came out this morning, or I drank water, right? Breathe Plus is a breathing app. It's literally just breathing exercises. And I have where, let's try one now. Okay. So box breathing is a really popular breathing. Maybe I'm gonna stop sharing for a minute. Yeah, you can see my face though, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So box breathing is where you take a breath in for 4 seconds, hold it for 4 seconds, and then you breathe out for 4 seconds and just kind of like repeat, right? And hold it. So you're creating a little box, and so it's a 4 count. So if you want to breathe along with me, we'll do 1 round. Okay. So in. Okay, that was fun, right? Breathing's always fun. I do it all the time. Okay, all right. So we're going into other resources here. So talk therapy. So talk therapy is just seeing a counselor. It's just going to someone saying, I'm really stressed, or I'm feeling this way, or whatever, okay? So talk therapy can help you, having somebody who's a trained professional that you can talk to, they can actually figure out what kind of like thinking patterns are going on in your head, and be able to start to work to break you out of those. They can also help to figure out like what problems you're having in your life that are just kind of piling on with that, and start to work to give you solutions on that. They can also help you to really start setting goals for yourself and helping you to get better. The thing that's interesting to me is that there's actually studies that show that your brain chemistry, not just your brain chemistry, but your brain changes the way that it thinks, the way that it does anything. From talk therapy. There's a study that says that basically the way that the brain processes threats is changed by talk therapy. And you only they've also shown that it only takes 15 to 20 sessions before a lot of people see these types of results, which is crazy. There's a ton of different kinds. The most common is CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. It's really, really was studied super well. For PTSD, there are other things that have been found a little bit to be more effective, like dialectic behavioral therapy, which is similar, but it requires you establishing certain behaviors, right? And then solving problems. There are also things like eye movement desensitization resolution, EMDR. There have been a ton of studies on this, and like it works to, it's basically, it's it's going over the trauma with certain eye movements, and it works somehow to rewire the brain, which is absolutely wild to me. Okay, you can also do individual or group therapy. It's just a matter of preference. And sometimes, you know, you try one thing and it just isn't working. It's totally okay. You can try another thing. None of these are, not everything is going to work for every single person. It's a matter of personal preference, and it has to be a good fit. So sometimes, you know, and this is something that I will stress. You know, I do meditate. I have a pretty decent diet, though I eat too much sugar. I exercise like crazy. But I also, you know, I require pharmaceutical intervention for this. That's totally fine. Sometimes, you know, your brain's just not making the chemicals that other people's brains are making. And it's totally okay to seek out those chemicals and supplement, because, you know, otherwise you're not functioning very well. So that's totally fine. It can be temporary. You can just go on it for a short period of time if that's something that you need to free up your brain in order to actually make that progress to get out of that rut, right? They also, you know, can do amazing work without any other kind of additional intervention. They can rebuild connections between nerve cells, which have been damaged by trauma and stress, which is crazy. So, and then there are certain disorders that may require long-term medication, which is fine. Just what you gotta do. I have, you know, everybody's gotta eat, you know, we've got to drink water, we all have to breathe. Like, some people also have to take medication, totally fine. Requires a diagnosis, so you need to go to either a psychiatrist or a medical doctor. There are tons, there are just so many. And so, you know, having a really trusted medical professional who's willing to make that journey for you, if it's something that you're really like starting out with, that is really crucial. And so having somebody who like will pay attention to this is really important. Okay. So communicate with people. Okay. All right. We have free options for counseling and psychiatric services. That is CAPS. You can search them online as well. They're incredible and they're available to us. The grad school also of psychology, there's cheap clinical services that you can get from the students there, who are, all of it supervised by a professional, and you know, they're quite professional. People who are getting their masters in social work or you know, other things like that, usually they've been working as licensed clinical social workers in the field for years, so they're not, you know, you know, they're not, they have experience, they have a lot of experience already. Okay. And so I think that's a cheap option where CAPS is free. They offer, CAPS offers like a lot of like group therapy and different things like that, but all of their stuff is online, and you can now actually book CAPS appointments through the My Rutgers website. Okay. So if you have the health insurance, the student health insurance, you can just get yourself a therapist. Anyone who's in town or nearby or anything like that who takes your insurance, you should be looking at anywhere between $50 to $40 per session. You can look on Psychology Today, or your health insurance has a list of providers that are in network. If you need inpatient or outpatient services, if you need to check yourself in somewhere. Princeton House comes highly recommended. And so outpatient is like you basically go 3 days a week in the mornings, right? Inpatient is when you really stay, okay? But it's intensive, and it's, you know, you've got a team of professionals working with you, okay? So if things get very, very bad, here's the information for the suicide helpline, New Jersey Suicide Prevention Hotline, and acute psychiatric emergency services. For Rutgers specific stuff, we also have inpatient and outpatient stuff for at this number here. I can forward all of this, but I think we have this on the SBAR, somewhere on the SBAR website. We have an old version of these slides, but I can make these available as well. There's also peer support lines through Rutgers, which are great. Okay. All right, so I'm wrapping up here. So we got through like kind of the nitty gritty stuff at the very end of like, these are useful things when things get unmanageable, okay? But there are a lot of tools that are, you know, they're hopefully before things get unmanageable. And what people need is going to be totally different. And like, I did mention a lot about self-care and like, you know, what that means as far as like, you know, setting aside things, being selfish and setting aside things for yourself. But I have the definition here of self-care and community care. And self-care is defined as the practice of taking an active role in protecting one's own well-being and happiness, in particular during periods of stress, right? Pretty consistent. And then there's community care, and I wanted to introduce this as a potential option and something that we should consider. Community care is a situation where individuals in a community are supported by each other during time of collective stress. So even before COVID, grad school is a perfect environment of collective stress. You see where I'm going with this, right? I don't think it's pretty obvious. So really, we're all kind of going through this, is my big takeaway from this. And I want to know what it is that you think that we could potentially do as a community to help one another through this. And I want you to think about what you could potentially do to either be there for other people to communicate what their mental health needs might be, or, you know, whether it would be helpful for you to know that you could talk to any of your colleagues and just be like, oh my God, like I'm like I got so stressed in that group meeting that like, you know, I think I had an anxiety attack because like my arms were shaking like, and I just was sweating buckets. It was awful, you know, and have them be like, yep, yeah, you know, like that is a natural thing to happen. Okay. So I'm gonna, I think, leave this here because I think this is probably where we're at. But yeah, I want you to think of if there's a time that, you know, you've needed to communicate with a colleague, or if that would be helpful to you. And I think that's just about it for me. So I think what I'd like to do now, we've kind of gone over a little bit, so I understand if people need to leave. But if it's possible, if we can stop recording